based nonprofit with a mission to create economic opportunities in low-income communities through the development of a healthy food system. Founded in 2008, Dreaming Out Loud began as a child and youth development program and evolved to tackle inequities by building community-based food systems in numerous DC communities. And last but definitely not least, 2018 Global Good Fund Fellow Tom McDougall. Tom is the founder and CEO of 4P Foods, a DC-based business that sources and delivers local, farm-fresh, and healthy food directly to consumers. While he and his wife were participating in a community-supported agriculture group, and after reading one too many Michael Pollan books, Tom found himself on a life-changing path of working towards food systems change, and more broadly, business systems change. Before we start, a few reminders. The discussion will be about 45 minutes long, and then we will open it up for questions. Please type in your questions in the Q&A as they come to mind, and they'll be addressed after the discussion. And with that, I will pass it on to Olivia to get the conversation started.
Thanks, Nasleen. So excited to be here and alongside some really esteemed leaders, thought leaders, activators in food systems. So thanks for having me. And before we jump into today's topic, I was wondering if I could ask each of you to tell us a little bit about how you got started in working in food systems, and in specific, how you started to work in increasing inclusion within our food systems and working in inclusive food systems. So maybe we can start in the way we were introduced. Antoine?
Sure, I'll start it out. So for me, I've spent most of my career working in fine dining as executive chef in a world where, you know, it's very secluded, you know, it's isolated. And, you know, even for me, when I first got into it, I didn't have access outside of the kitchen to some of the things that I was serving. So I learned very early on that there was a major barrier. I've always throughout my career have found ways to build bridges with either culinary schools or programs to introduce that world to other individuals. It wasn't really until I moved here to Charlottesville where I really experienced I call it a micro system of individuals that just didn't have access to career opportunities or advancements in the hospitality industry. And a lot of those folks look like me. So what I did was I made a decision to start a company that really focused on giving those individuals the skill sets that they need to elevate in the hospitality field.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Chris, how about you?
Yeah, I would say that my experience in the food system started with my family. I'm from Tennessee, but a large portion of my family is from Georgia and Florida. And so, we come from a family that is connected to Rosewood, Florida as well, which was the site of one of America's most notable, racial pogroms in that city that razed this town to the ground and resulted in the land loss of Black farms and Black businesses, and folks were, from that point scattered in different directions, and a lot of our folks ended up in different parts of Georgia after that experience. My grandfather, growing up in Jacksonville, Georgia, grew up farming and sharecropping. When he was in his 20s, I believe, he moved up to Connecticut to work at Pratt & Whitney, assembling airplane parts or helicopter parts. And he eventually, became a real estate entrepreneur, but was still connected to the land and to the soil. And when he was done on, his Saturday mornings, waking up at, 5, 6 in the morning, and when I would go visit him, pulling me along in his little blue truck, he would go to a garden space that he cultivated, and he would have corn and potatoes and tomatoes and all these good things that we would go harvest together. So my connection to food started with my family, and I always remember those things. My Uncle Walt hobby farmed an acre across the street from my grandmother's house in Tennessee. And then even when I began to work, my first job was washing dishes at a Pizza Hut. So my food experience and connection, started very early on.
Thanks for sharing that, Chris. It's great to hear your family story and the connection. Tom, how about you? Do you mind sharing with us a little bit about how you got started in food systems work, and in particular, the focus on greater inclusion within food systems?
Sure. Yeah. First, thanks for inviting me and for organizing this panel. My food system story comes also from how I was raised. I grew up in the Hudson Valley area of New York, in a more rural part of it, sort of surrounded by a lot of independent family farms, and worked on a couple of them, and watched in my childhood and teenage years as they slowly but surely failed, and got sold off to developers, and watched as a lot of those families struggled. My father is a grocer. I watched as his relationship with local farms slowly diminished because the grocery industry got more and more consolidated, and less and less was purchased from local farms in the region. And then I moved to Washington, D.C., and I got to sort of see a different part of the supply chain that I hadn't experienced before. And that was the inequitable food access that exists in so many parts of the country, and living now in an urban setting and volunteering for food access organizations and social justice organizations, and recognizing for the first time in my life, especially as a white man with privilege, how inequitable it is, and how our systems have been designed to make it that way. And that for me was a beginning of a journey that I'm still very much on, and will be probably for the rest of my life. But learning and listening to people and from people like Chris, frankly, about what is my role as an entrepreneur and a food system activist in creating more equity and inclusion in a better future. And so we launched 4P Foods in 2014 we're a food hub, but our goal and role is to be a bit of a benevolent distributor and actor and partner in helping to support both parts of this food system, where it comes from and why and how, but also who it's going to and why and how. So it's been a journey, and I look forward to it continuing.
Thank you all for sharing a little bit about your story. And I wanted to take the time to pivot into the topic that brings us here together. Today, we're talking about broken food systems. And as we all know, we are several months into dealing with the impacts of coronavirus and COVID on our economy and in our communities. So I wanted to talk a little bit and start by talking by any shifts. What major shifts you might have seen, or trends related to this pandemic? Have they always been here? I think earlier Antoine was talking a little bit about the exclusive nature of some of the food systems that exist. Do you think that this exclusion within the food system is the same, less than, or more than it was in January, when at that time we didn't really realize the gravity of COVID on our society? How broken are we as compared to earlier in the year? Let's start maybe backwards and hear from Tom first, or jump in if you would like to participate.
Sure. Yeah, it has further exacerbated the divide. It has made it far worse, and it is the inequities that existed all along are very much in the spotlight now. It is those that have been marginalized, whether they're food producers or families that are just consumers, are being further marginalized, and it's much worse, and getting worse. What I find myself trying to correct our customers and some of our team members, even, of this idea of like, can't wait till we go back to normal. It's this desire, like, no, because normal wasn't working for tens of millions of families. We need to use this moment to talk about what is broken, so that we can co-create a new normal that is way different than it was before, because it wasn't working.
Thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I would say that the trends that we've seen are just an exacerbation of the inequities that existed before. The pandemic of white supremacy is one that we've been battling for 400 years. And what we've seen is that those who have the least access to resources, no access to family wealth, they've been damaged the hardest. And with America's racial caste system that developed specifically around chattel slavery and deeply connected to the food system, that's who's been impacted the hardest. So those cascading impacts that result from something like the pandemic hitting, you feel it first amongst the food workers. You have Black and brown folks who concentrate in those fields. So we do see a lot of job losses in the communities where we work. There's resting double-digit unemployment. And so when you have times like this, you look at the surroundings and you see that 1 out of 2 adults don't have employment. Another cascading impact that we've more recently felt was the announcement that Washington, D.C.'s or the metro region's transit system is due to cut 2,400 jobs. And if anyone's ever ridden the metro, or if you understand the makeup of Metro's workforce, there's a cascading impact of the pandemic that hits those folks as well. So we're talking about 2,400 jobs being cut, largely, Black folks employed in those jobs. And so when you talk about a 60% increase in food insecurity, that is reported to be on the horizon or rising right now, you see that because of the result of not only the pandemic but previous exclusion in terms of employment and concentration in food. So what we've seen is that the crisis is deepening and the response is not has not been equal to the circumstances.
I agree with you. And Antoine, your thoughts on this broken food system?
I remember when, back in March when the pandemic first hit, looking at the news, and there was like a video of, large, massive farmers just like dumping crops because they didn't have a system designed to distribute it to smaller consumers. They were used to selling it in large batches. And I think that was the first indication for me to say, wow, like there is a big disconnect. And then I would say that to even kind of fast forward it to now, what I've seen is, amazingly, especially in our community here in Charlottesville, there has been so many philanthropic organizations and individuals stepping up to make sure that, folks that don't have access to food have access. But the problem is education. A lot of the things that are coming out of the ground in the fall, things like butternut squash, things like eggplant, folks don't know how to use it. So there is a big gap between, folks having access and them actually knowing what to do with the product. I feel like there's an opportunity, and this is what I'm focused on right now, how can we educate people on how to work with product that's coming out of the ground during the season? And I feel like this has really kind of, exposed, the lack of knowledge when it comes to seasonality of working with produce.
Mm-hmm. Great, thank you. That brings me to, and that segues quite nicely into our next kind of topic of conversation, and that is what is the significance of locality or regional food systems to advancing food justice and greater inclusion within the system? Today we're talking about food systems, regional food systems, and inclusion. What is the connection between the two of those things?
Yeah, anybody can jump in? All right. Yeah, I would say that the advantages of a localized food system are multiple. When you talk about hiring, when you talk about how resources are spent in terms of procurement, the more that you can localize that, the more impact you can have on employment and even community efficacy, right? So for us at Dreaming Out Loud this year, we launched the Black Farm CSA, Community Supported Agriculture Program, on Juneteenth. And so with that, we're able to procure produce and other items from Black farmers, but also value-aligned farmers and food hubs like 4P to be able to get that food out to folks that are, now unemployed, facing food insecurity. But in order to, pack those shares of the CSA, in order to aggregate that produce, it requires a local workforce. And so we were able to hire folks from within our immediate communities. We operate a 2-acre farm and food hub at Kelly Miller in Ward 7 here in Washington, D.C., where there's, resting double-digit unemployment, a part of an area that only has 3 grocery stores for more than 150,000 people. And so when you're able to localize the food system and make local hires, you can localize the economic benefits of that food system. And so that's what we're working towards. And those are some of the advantages that we see.
Chris, I agree with you on that, Dan, and I think that that's a beautiful thing, and we see it here in our community too. Is and when I talk about education, I mean that's exactly what it is. Really putting people in a position to where they, are working with it. They have their hands on it. They're kind of in that environment, and it gives them a level of education where they take that back to their family, to their friends, and it kind of creates this change, this natural change in the system. Here in Charlottesville, we have, the local Food Justice Network, which is a massive conglomerate of small organizations. Tom, I think 4P is a part of it. And, they are, really kind of pushing that needle, right? Trying to educate people about, produce and farming and what it looks like in our community. I feel like for so long, it's been massively controlled by large corporations. And, people feel like they can go to the store in the wintertime and get a strawberry, and that's normal. Right. So there's just like such a big disconnect. And I think that to your point of getting back to that, educating people and giving them jobs in these positions and making them a part of the system is the first step in really creating that change.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think I can only build on that and say that the current system that is one that's dominated by multinational corporations who have a fiduciary obligation to maximize profit at all costs, strive towards economies of scale and externalization of true costs onto marginalized communities in our environment, which perpetuates that problem. Whereas a smaller, place-based, networked, decentralized food system has the potential to begin creating wealth in the communities who have had it stolen from them. That is a precursor to the conversation that needs to be had around reparations. So, for example, in Southern Virginia and Northern North Carolina, there are a lot of Black farmers who are tobacco farmers, and they've been hit extremely hard by the death of the tobacco industry. And consumers who want to live their values with their food choices and want to buy local or want to buy from BIPOC farmers can do so and begin to transfer their wealth, at least with their purchases, to those farmers at a network decentralized level, because the alternative just systemically makes sure that that doesn't happen.
Thanks. I think each of you definitely brought up components of why we at our organization really are focused on building inclusive food systems, and that is to not only bring healthy food access into communities from which it's been extracted, but also to create economic opportunities from those that have historically been excluded from the food economy. So those two components are very front and center in our body of work. But this is not without challenge. And so I wanted to talk a little bit about what you see as some of the biggest challenges within your body of work in fostering inclusion and advancing justice within local and regional food systems. Happy to hear from anyone, or I can call on you.
Well, yeah, I would say that the challenges that we face are different in the urban environment. We face the pressures of the cost of real estate in terms of developing infrastructure and the type of infrastructure that can support robust food systems that can create jobs. That's a major issue. That's a pressure brought on by a form of rapacious capitalism that spares no cultural monument, no individual who can't afford to benefit from the machine. And so we find communities under pressure from developers that are being pushed out due to gentrification and displacement. So for us, that challenge is both one of our immediate ability to impact the circumstances, but also strategically being able to help folks stay in place so that we're actually building something that's serving the folks that have been extracted from in the first place. And so that's what we see on the ground. There's other challenges I could name, but the things that most challenge us are the ones that are the biggest structural issues.
Thank you. And as you say, that's just the vestiges of many centuries of injustice and discrimination within our financial system and other systems. Antoine, Tom?
Yeah, plus one to everything that Chris just said. It is the systemic design. This book, the half has never been told. Slavery and the making of American capitalism is sort of the historical narrative of why our food system is so broken, because our economic system is so broken. The thing that is challenging for us every day is there is a spoken desire, and I think a genuine desire for influential actors like institutions, like universities, like schools, to want to use their purchasing power to change the system and buy more from small farmers and Black and brown farmers. And those are great dialogues right up until the point when we start to talk about price. And then it slows down really fast. So it's frustrating that I shouldn't say frustrating, but it's certainly a challenge that there is a desire to make change and create economic opportunity and new market share for farmers whose market share has been stolen from them. It's frustrating that it becomes a stumbling block when institutions or people in positions of power at those institutions who create those budgets don't recognize what the real responsibility is.
Yeah,
I think that, Tom, you just kind of hit the nail on the head when you talk about the price. I mean, for the longest, you think about the affluent we're only the ones that can afford organic. Even now, organic is so expensive. Yet, people talk about the health benefits of it, but when you look at schools, they try to get the cheapest price things for the schools. And I think that, again, it goes back to a level of education that needs to happen, not just on the base level, but on the executive level also, and helping them understand what that looks like. And I think, to Tom's point, there are tons of conversations happening around it, but I feel like the conversations are happening around it, and they're not actually happening to create the change that needs to happen in the school systems. Somebody just needs to kind of just take the bull by the horns and say, this is what we're going to do, and move in a direction. And I feel like, when it comes to funds, that always seems to be one of the major barriers, in which creates the opportunity of looking at these budgets and really redefining what's important.
Great, thanks. I mean, in our body of work, that is indeed something that we struggle with, is defining these outputs and these outcomes in non-financial terms. There are lots of benefits to some of the work that we do in creating economic opportunity and healthy food access in communities that are not necessarily strictly financial in nature. So there's not a sort of one-to-one ratio, and we're trying to change the way that we view those impacts and value the impacts. There have to have been some successes in this body of work in advancing inclusion within local and regional food systems. Can you touch a little bit on what some of those successes have looked like, and what have led to the successes? Maybe what are critical levers that some of us in the audience can push on in order to see some successes in advancing inclusion in local food systems?
I would say, over the last, 5 to 10 years, the grassroots movement has been so strong. I mentioned earlier, organizations like the Food Justice Network here, folks like Tom with 4P. I mean, like the way they're stirring the pot is like phenomenal. They're not simmering, they're boiling, right? They're kind of boiling over, and it's creating, awareness that wasn't there before. And people are starting to ask the question, like, what can I do? How can I be a part of this change? And I think that that's what it is. Someone had to step up to really kind of educate the masses. And I think that slowly, one by one, on a grassroots level, especially in a community like Charlottesville, I would say the awareness is much bigger than it was, 3 years ago.
Yeah, I think that continuing to build power and organize on the ground is going to be critical to realizing the gains and successes that we speak of. Connecting the dots to other aspects of civic life and American life, from housing to healthcare, making those connections between the ways in which our institutions, of course, can procure, but the individual choices that folks make and how those choices are a part of voting against the system that we've been, for lack of a better word, gifted with, the unequal system. And so, if we're thinking about connected organizing, for us, it looks like, yes, we're able to utilize the district's purchasing power through a program such as Produce Plus, which allows for district residents to receive $10 per week for produce for free, and we can use that to procure from Black farmers. And that produce share may be going to a public housing, senior housing, where folks are under pressure from developers right next to new Whole Foods, in an apartment that overlooks much of the city and several new condos. It looks like organizing with those folks to resist any attempts to redevelop that space in a way that excludes them from remaining in place. So that might look like cooperative ownership of that building, but the organizing and the power building and the framing happens at the connection point with food. So for us, realizing the gains of a localized food system means that we're also connecting that food movement to other movements that really encompass justice as an overall concept that doesn't silo itself to food, but is more expansive across, what really needs to happen in terms of building out a dignified existence for every human being on Earth.
I had very similar thoughts in that there seems to be success in leaders like Chris and Antoine and others touching so many parts of other organizations that aren't just their own organization. Like I sometimes describe myself as a social justice activist stuck inside of an entrepreneur's body. Like we're using the power that we have as leaders in our own right in our own neighborhoods to do so much more than distribute food. Like policy change and activism that can cross policy lines, like going down to Richmond and advocating with legislators down there for the decriminalization of recreational marijuana, which disproportionately affects Black men in this country, so that we can turn it into an agricultural commodity crop to help the extremely rural community get their farm going again. Like that can be couched in many different ways. That ultimately is about social justice at its core, but it can be framed with the right kind of partnerships in a way that lands well, that ends up in policy change, or ends up in pushing developers back, or ends up in some of these decriminalization possibilities. And I think that identity as social entrepreneurs is a success, because as we reach out to each other, Antoine, Chris, and I have been working really closely now in the last 8 months. I feel inspired by them, and I feel like we're getting loud enough that eventually, hopefully, someone will start to listen.
Mm-hmm. Yes, thank you. I mean, it sounds like each of you are saying that food systems and the environment has changed over time, in the time that you've been in the space. And coming back to our current climate, our current economic climate, social climate, a lot has happened, or at least been exposed in this year, our current pandemic. Can you talk a little bit about the risks potentially and opportunities that you see in the current climate from now and looking ahead into the future?
I would, uh, okay. No, what I would say to that is when you look at, the one thing that people have now is a lot more screen time. And, I think that people are at home a lot more now. They're spending more time in their kitchens than they have in a long time. And people are rediscovering the possibilities of produce in their kitchens. And I think that there's a huge opportunity now, more so than ever, to really kind of plant that seed and drive it. And I think that all three of us are doing it in different ways, in educating people and educating the masses on the possibilities of food. I mean, because that's kind of what it comes down to. I think for so long, a lot of people just kind of looked at food as just, a fuel source for themselves, but it's so much more. I think Chris touched on that a little bit earlier about how, food is really kind of the core of so many other economic opportunities in communities around the nation. And I think that, right now, more than ever, people are listening. They're open to, learning. And I think that it's up to organizations like ours to really making sure that we're providing people with the information and the tools to use them to grow themselves and their families in their communities.
I was going to jump in with some of the, some of the opportunities and some of the dangers is, I mentioned this a little bit earlier, but to build on what Antoine said, it feels like people's eyes are opening in some way, shape, or form to some of the various injustices that have existed for a long time. We had one of our customers wrote in who signed up during COVID because grocery store shelves were closing and April and May were scary. So she signed up for our service, which brings groceries to her house. And she wrote in and sort of described this whole experience where she does food systems work. She understands the concept of and advocates for better food access in all communities. And yet she was nervous, waiting and anxious, waiting for her bag of 4P Foods produce to arrive. Would it arrive on time? Would it actually get there? All of that. And it did. We showed up, we dropped it off, and she brought it to her kitchen and she opened it and she started to cry. And she realized later in thinking about it, it's because that feeling that she was feeling was food insecurity. She, for the first time in her life, felt food insecure. And it sat with her that, wow, and tens of millions of Americans and people across the globe feel that feeling every day and always have, because the systems that we have made that to be. So her eyes have certainly been open, and that's the opportunity. The danger, and I mentioned this before, as everyone feels this gravity of the continuation of this pandemic, there's a lot of spoken desire without recognizing the danger in saying this, to go back to normal. And that is the danger. If we go back to normal, we will perpetuate the problems that have always been there. We need to not go back to normal. I think that's our probably biggest danger.
I just want to chime in on that. I think that, Tom, I mean, you just said it, right? But the real thing is that the sad thing is that people consider what was before normal. I mean, it was never normal. It's never been normal. And I think that's the message, right? Like, it wasn't normal before. You're aware now, you think about the 3 steps, right? Like the first step is awareness, right? And then the second step is, doing something to change it, right? And I think that's it. I think people's eyes are open, but I think more importantly, you want to make sure that people understand that what you had before, it wasn't working. And you don't want that. You really want to really look at where you are today and look at the possibilities of where you can be tomorrow. And I think that that's really a message across the board that I think as organizations that we're all trying to find the words to shape in our messaging.
Mm-hmm. That's right. I think that's you know, in every crisis there's opportunity, and we have the opportunity to reframe things. Again, I couldn't agree more that, you know, what happened before was not normal, and so with this opportunity where folks have more time on their hands to be able to reflect and think, and things have kind of shaken the foundation of what they've been told to believe in, we can now give them a different idea of what to organize around and build power around and push forward, whether that's at the local level or the federal or global level. That we have to reframe things around justice and be unafraid of uncomfortable conversations and challenging power and challenging systems and saying that they don't work, and being ready for when the system swings back, right? And so that's where we are now. I think we're you know, we need to steel ourselves and be ready for that. You know, some of us have taken a deep breath and said, oh, it's finally over with the, you know, transition of federal power here in the States. And that can't happen. All right. Justice never moved forward by just, you know, one election here or one election there. It's brick by brick. And so, you know, for those of us who are doing the work, it's okay to take maybe a deep breath, but you better get ready for what's next.
Thank you. And before we transition into some of the questions that are coming in from our audience, I wanted to offer up an opportunity to hear from each of you as you address the many supporters among us, among this audience, and we think about race, recovery, and now not going back to the old normal and creating a new normal and reimagining what the food systems should look like and will look like. What is your call to action? What is your suggestion to those among us of what they should be doing to help foster greater justice and inclusion within our local food systems? Chris?
I'll start.
What
I would say to that is, you know, there are so many folks out there like myself who are, you know, avid readers and educators of food. I love learning about food. I love learning about culture. I love learning about cuisine. And I learned many years ago that I learn so much more when I share. And that's what I would say, share. You know, don't just, you know, read a book or learn something about a new cuisine or learn something about cooking and just keep it to yourself. There are so many people around you in your circles that, you know, are yearning for that knowledge, and that it will help them and their families in so many different ways. And I would encourage folks to really just share what you know, no matter how small or how large, you know, share it on the education level, you know, share it with kids, you know, share it with adults, but share, you know, don't just hold knowledge to yourself, especially when it comes to food systems.
Tom? Oh, me? Yeah, I think again, building power is where my head is going. You know, right now we have the opportunity to utilize food as a tool to continue to do that, and folks need to tap in at where they have close ties, whether that's on the local level on an issue that means something to you, or there's a campaign issue that connects with you. There's all sorts of opportunities to plug in. You know, one thing that came in the wake of the Black Lives Matter protests is that there was a increased attention around Black-led work. And so for me, it's finding ways for folks to tap in and continue to support that work beyond the kind of initial groundswell, and continue the long form work of building out a just system. And so, you know, I think local issues are close to people's heart, and I think sometimes small wins on a local level can help folks feel that there's momentum building towards bigger change. And so for me, it's just, I don't think of that as incrementalism. I think of that as building towards more radical shifts. And so for me, it's just being able to frame for folks that we are chipping away and things will we're going to win. We'll be victorious in the end.
Yeah, and I guess for me, I mean, every plus one to what Antoine and Chris both said. For me, the thing that I've been doing a lot of that I've found really helpful is just a whole lot more listening, and a whole lot of introspection, and a whole lot of, to Chris's point, getting comfortable with uncomfortable conversations. Like, as a white man, I have a lot of privilege, some of which I was aware of, a lot of which I wasn't, and probably a whole lot more that I'm still not. So I need to go on my own journey to figure out what I can do with said privilege and access, to begin to transfer that to communities who it was stolen from in the first place. So listen, and be engaging in those conversations. And then in addition to that, what Chris and Antoine just said, like, do something, engage. If like, read more, reach out to more. If you have treasure, don't donate, invest into Black-led organizations and businesses. Begin to transfer whatever time, resource, passion that you have into this work, and doing something, and saying something wrong is a lot better than doing nothing or saying nothing at all.
Great, thank you all. I see some questions coming in about resources, and so would welcome any of our panelists to share something about resources for small gardeners or neighborhood garden networks, a central hub of resources that you might recommend, and or possibly books or other learnings about the systemic issues of exclusion within our food system. Does anyone have anything to suggest on those items?
I would say, from a local level, I mentioned this earlier. I actually mentioned a couple of times. There's an organization called the Food Justice Network here, and aside from the work they're doing, just the way they educate, I find enlightening. They really take the time to look at different food systems and provide information and tools for folks to be a part of the change. So I would highly recommend anybody out there that is looking to get into it. Look at that, and look at committees, look at boards in your communities, that are doing that. Myself, I sit on 3 boards and 3 different committees because I want to learn. I want to be a part of the change. I want to be a part of the decision-making process. And I feel like that's where it starts, just like really kind of injecting yourself into it and just kind of riding with it and just, providing what you have. Everybody has something to bring to the table, no matter how small it is. It makes a difference.
Tom, I think you went to go grab some reading material to share with us. And Chris?
Yeah, sure. I had mentioned this one already, but one of Chris's colleagues recommended this to me, and I'm finding it incredibly helpful in understanding the historical narrative of how we've gotten to the economic model that we have, which is the half has never been told. Speaking specifically about how slavery has designed American capitalism. And then from a sort of, and this addresses a little bit some of the questions I see in the chat about pricing. It's global capitalist model is what's really broken, because the true price, the price that we have of things never represents the real cost of those things. And a book that really, I think, gets that quite well is called The Travels of a T-Shirt and the Global Economy. The externalization of true costs of the production of food, the growth of food, the distribution, the processing, and the consumption of food is externalized. So that we are talking about, we often have this conversation about, well, good food or food grown by small farmers or Black farmers, it costs more. And that's just not the case. It's that the industrial food system has artificially cheap food that's externalizing the real cost of that onto our healthcare system, onto Black and brown communities who are disproportionately affected by our healthcare system and our food system and our economic systems. That Big Mac and fries that may be $4 at the register at McDonald's, if you take into account the environmental degradation and the price tag associated with that, our inflated healthcare costs and the price tag associated with that, not to mention the increasing racial wealth gap and the corresponding price tag associated with that, that should be a $40 burger and fries. Whereas the regeneratively produced, independently owned, small farm that is sequestering carbon from the atmosphere, creating local economic multiplier effects and local jobs, that $14 burger at your local restaurant, that should be $4, and that farmer should be paid for the ecosystem services and community development that he or she is responsible for, and they're not. It's not a matter of price parity right now and trying to figure out how to make good food less expensive than industrial food. It's about how to blow up the system so that things are accurately priced.
Amen. Yeah, I think in terms of resources, those are two great places to start that I just wrote down. I would also say that, you know, if you're at the local level and you're looking for resources for gardeners or whatnot, depending on where you are, there's someone doing it. You know, tap in, go get your hands dirty with them and find out what resources are available. Don't be afraid to partner with folks and, you know, learn from folks who are already doing the work. That's one of my major keys. But yeah, major resources that that Tom mentioned will really help frame the bigger picture of what's happening down to what's happening on the ground.
Right, and in this on the thread of the talk about cost versus price, there is a question that has come in with respect to overcoming the issue of cost and effort to get school systems and other large volume purchasers to come on board with more socially responsible choices. What do you see as the solution? Are there grants or other funding that exist to help with this, similar to subsidies that help massive farming corporations? Does anyone know?
Yeah, I think you can find grants to help build capacity and build infrastructure and things like that to help at least demonstrate the potential of local food and more procurement around local food. You know, we've been able to do that. Recently, we had a site visit with the director of the Department of Parks and Recreation for the District of Columbia, because that's where our farm is situated here in DC. And on their land. And so we were able to describe, you know, the value of infrastructure and these pieces in creating local jobs and in our highest order of our vision, creating wealth, right? But I think that site visit helps kind of incrementally in terms of our own infrastructure, but also gives him a vision of what's possible so that we can begin to shift policy. So public policy is a major aspect of the next steps. You know, that DPR director can then be used to influence other aspects of the district's agencies and the decision making, and then therefore to be able to influence the city council. But underneath that, what undergirds that is the organizing and the power building and the examples from within the community that are going to be the voices that push and form the groundswell that tips the scales and tips the balance. And so for us, when we're hiring folks, you know, the farm at Kelly Miller, the folks who work the farm, a number of the folks are right there from public housing that surrounds the space. And so when those folks' voices, Ms. Joanne, Mr. Hill, are able to make that case and are a part of that solution, and the community has been a part of visioning the solutions, then you can really tip the scales towards public policy that'll deepen the resources available so that we can procure local food, so that we can have affordable healthcare and housing and the like.
And speaking of, Antoine, did you have something to add too?
No, I just want to say he hit it right. Like there are so many foundations that have, you know, especially this year, that have done, you know, capacity building grants. And that is a great starting point for many organizations, especially schools that are looking to do something like that. We have a program here in Charlottesville High School. I believe it's called city schoolyard gardens, and they have a garden on premise, and they're growing things. They're teaching kids about fresh produce and the seasonality of produce and it coming out of the ground, and even more so, they're using that in the kitchens, and they're learning how to cook with it. And I think that is a big piece of it, right? Like, it's one thing to give people access to it. It's a whole nother thing to teach them the different cuisines that you can make with that, that one piece of produce. So I feel like it's two parts to it.
Great, thanks. I'm a little overwhelmed by the engagement in the chat box. We have a lot of questions that are coming in, and I just want to acknowledge that we will probably not be able to get to all of them. But perhaps as a final question, we could talk a little bit about the Farm Bill. There are some questions that have come in about how to build a broad coalition to influence the next Farm Bill in order to subsidize and incentivize changes that we've talked about here, maybe changes in the cost structure, changes in subsidies to school food, for example. Are any of you involved with the Farm Bill and advocating at any level to see some kind of improvements in that piece of legislation?
Yeah, I would say at Dreaming Out Loud, oh, sorry, go.
You go, Chris. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, at Dreaming Out Loud, we've been a part of various coalitions that have advocated on behalf of changes to the Farm Bill or particular parts of the Farm Bill. We're very fortunate in our proximity to Congress. So we've made visits to congresspersons' offices. We've had conversations with senators. And so we've been fortunate to be able to do that because of our proximity, but there are also other organizations that are more broad and connected to organizing across the country that we work to have conversations with as well, so that, various perspectives are a part of that voice that can advocate for what that, what a just farm bill looks like. Tom convenes MAFRAC, which he can tell you more about, but it's a coalition of regional food actors who have a similar mindset, and even the Eastern Food Hub Collaborative, where folks who are building this type of work can chime in, and there's more of a collective voice that's formed by having conversations and doing work together, right? So doing work together, you see the gaps, you understand the details of what those gaps might be and why they have developed. And so, you have a different framing when you have a conversation with a senator, when you've been, moving turkey from one part of Virginia to, Ward 7 and Ward 8 in DC together than you did when you were theoretically talking about it on a panel like today. So,
yeah, everything Chris said. I mean, what has to happen with this next lily pad of jumping the conversation is policy change. It's the Farm Bill as an example. It 0.00045% of the Farm Bill money in recent years has gone to Black farmers. The one part of the USDA says that 50% of your plate, kids, should be fruits and vegetables. And with the Farm Bill, 0.05% goes to subsidizing fruit and vegetables. A big chunk of it is dedicated to SNAP, Supplemental Nutrition Assistance Programs, which Democrats will often cheer as a win, and it's important that it's there. And we need a whole lot more of it, but we simultaneously also need to look in the mirror as a society and say, why the hell do we need SNAP? Why is it so bad? Why do food banks and food pantries need to exist? Because we have systemically made the poor and impoverished remain poor and impoverished so that those who have wealth and power remain in power. And so the Farm Bill is one element, and it's one of the biggest in terms of legislation, but we need not lose the forest to the trees, because little marginal wins within the Farm Bill, albeit adding up to billions of dollars, will not change the system. We need to keep and that's where I think, to echo Chris, this coalition building that we're all part of and being a voice of various coalitions, it's sort of all building into now a movement, and movements can change policy in a very serious way. And I think all of us are wondering what that's going to look like as this coalesces, but I'm with Chris, like the system's going to swing back hard and we need to be ready for it. The only industry to spend more money in lobbying dollars, first one is oil and energy, the second one is the food system. So when we start chipping away at this thing, they're gonna fight for their market share, and we need to be ready. You know, there's a reason that the USDA, like DOD, the Department of Defense, is the thing that manages school food in this country, and there's a reason for that, to protect it, and we need to disrupt it.
Well, we're reaching the end of our time together. I apologize we weren't able to get to all of these questions, but I think that's a great ending point. And just to underline what each of you had shared with us as our call to action, that is to share, to learn, to build local power, and to engage. And ultimately, this will culminate in policy level changes. I wanted to turn it back to Nazaleen to provide some final concluding remarks before we all have to depart.
Thank you, Olivia. Thank you, Antoine. Thank you, Chris. Thank you, Tom. What a thought-provoking, open, honest conversation. Really appreciate you taking the time out of your busy days to spend this hour with us and for sharing your perspectives and really challenging all of us to rethink food systems and understand how integrated food is to everything. It's what we eat, it's how we breathe, it's how we live, and how we can all make a contribution to make a difference. And also just the challenge that you put out to us that, you know, going back to normal is not acceptable anymore. So thank you again. Thank you to the audience for also spending this hour with us. Our next Global Good Fund event is next Wednesday, December 9th at 5:30 p.m., where we will be featuring Arlen Hamilton, who is the founder and CEO of Backstage Capital. If you'd like to attend, please register for the event directly on our website, globalgoodfund.org. Again, thank you so much. Have a great rest of the day. Goodbye.